The radio crackled with static as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez pressed the transmit button one more time. Nothing but silence came back from the other end. He looked at his watch. 0347 hours. They should have checked in with base command 20 minutes ago. Still nothing, Chief. Petty Officer First Class Jake Williams whispered from his position behind a cluster of rocks. His M4 rifle was trained on the valley below, scanning for any movement in the moonless night. Rodriguez shook his head grimly. Dead air. Something's wrong back at base. He adjusted his night vision goggles and studied the terrain around their position. The four-man SEAL team had been inserted into this remote Afghan valley 3 days ago with a simple mission: locate and observe a suspected Taliban weapons cache in the village below. What should have been a routine reconnaissance had turned into something much more complicated. The village wasn't just hiding weapons. Rodriguez and his team had discovered it was a major staging area for Taliban fighters moving between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Dozens of armed militants had been flowing through the settlement for the past 2 days. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Chin shifted his weight carefully, mindful of the loose gravel beneath him. Chief, my radio's getting the same thing. Total blackout on all frequencies. Chun was their communications specialist, and if he couldn't raise anyone, that meant they were truly on their own. The fourth member of their team, Petty Officer Second Class David Park, had been maintaining watch on their rear approach since they'd taken this position on the rocky hillside. He crawled over to where Rodriguez was crouched. Boss, we've got movement down in the village. Looks like they're getting ready for something big. Rodriguez took Park's night vision scope and peered down at the settlement below. Sure enough, armed figures were moving between the mud brick buildings with purpose. Vehicles were being loaded with supplies and weapons. Whatever was happening, it was happening now. They're mobilizing, Rodriguez muttered. Probably a major operation. He handed the scope back to Park. Keep watching them. Williams, Chin, we need to figure out our extraction plan. The team had been inserted by helicopter 3 nights ago under cover of darkness. Their extraction point was supposed to be a clearing 2 kilometers north of their current position. But without radio contact, they had no way of knowing if their ride would show up at the scheduled time tomorrow night. Chin pulled out his GPS unit and checked their coordinates. Chief, even if we can't talk to base, we should head to the extraction point. Maybe they'll send the bird anyway. Williams nodded in agreement. Standard operating procedure says if we miss 2 consecutive check-ins, they'll attempt extraction at the primary LZ. But Rodriguez wasn't so sure. The mission parameters had changed dramatically since they'd arrived. Intelligence had suggested a small weapons storage site. Instead, they'd found evidence of a major Taliban operation involving dozens of fighters and vehicles loaded with military-grade equipment. Park, what's your count down there? Rodriguez asked quietly. Park studied the village through his scope again. I'm seeing at least 40 armed personnel. Multiple vehicles, looks like 3 pickup trucks and 2 larger transport vehicles. Heavy weapons mounted on at least 2 of the pickups. The numbers kept getting worse. When they'd first arrived, the village had appeared to house maybe 15 to 20 militants. Now, they were looking at double that number, with more arriving throughout the night. Chin had been monitoring radio frequencies, hoping to pick up any chatter that might give them information about what had happened to their communication link with base. Chief, I'm picking up Taliban radio traffic on several frequencies. Sounds like they're coordinating something. Can you understand what they're saying? Some of it. My Pashto's not perfect, but I'm hearing references to American forces and something about blocking escape routes. A chill ran down Rodriguez's spine. Blocking escape routes could mean the Taliban had somehow learned about their presence. If that was the case, their current position might already be compromised. Williams had been studying the map of their area. Chief, if they know we're here, this ridge line is going to be tough to defend. We've got good observation of the valley, but there are multiple approach routes they could use to get behind us. Rodriguez made a decision. We're moving. Pack it up, light and quiet. We'll head north toward the extraction point, but we'll take an indirect route and find better defensive positions. The 4 SEALs began gathering their equipment with practiced efficiency. Every movement was deliberate and silent. They'd been operating together for over a year, and they could practically read each other's minds. As they prepared to move out, Park held up his hand for silence. Wait, listen. In the distance, they could hear the sound of engines starting up in the village below. Through their night vision, they could see lights beginning to move. They're coming up the hill, Chun whispered urgently. Rodriguez felt his heart rate spike. The Taliban fighters weren't just mobilizing for some distant operation. They were heading directly toward the SEAL team's position. How long do we have? Rodriguez asked Park, who was still watching through the scope. Maybe 10 minutes before the first vehicles reach the base of this ridge. If they're coming up here, we need to move now. The team grabbed their essential gear and began moving along the ridge line as quickly as they dared in the darkness. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder. Rodriguez led the way, using his night vision to navigate between the rocks and loose gravel that could give away their position. Every few hundred meters, he would stop and listen, trying to gauge how close their pursuers were getting. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they reached a position where the ridge line curved around the side of the mountain. Rodriguez called for a halt and had Park check their rear with the scope. I can see at least 3 vehicles that have made it up the access road. Looks like they're deploying personnel to search the area where we were positioned. That confirmed Rodriguez's worst fear. Somehow, the Taliban had learned about their presence and location. This wasn't a coincidence or a patrol that had stumbled across their tracks. This was a deliberate search operation. How could they have known where we were? Williams asked quietly. Shouldn't have been thinking the same thing. Our communications blackout, the timing of this search, it's too coordinated to be accidental. Rodriguez didn't want to voice what they were all thinking, but the evidence was hard to ignore. Someone had provided the Taliban with information about their mission. Whether it was a security breach at their base, compromised intelligence, or something else entirely, they were now operating in a completely hostile environment with no support. We have to assume the worst, Rodriguez told his team. No outside help, compromised mission, and actively hunted. From now on, we treat this as a survival situation. The SEALs found a better defensive position among a cluster of large boulders that provided cover from multiple directions. It wasn't perfect, but it would give them options if they were discovered. As they settled into their new position, Chun continued monitoring radio frequencies. Chief, I'm picking up more chatter. They're definitely coordinating a search pattern. Sounds like they're spreading out to cover the entire ridge system. Williams studied their map by the dim light of a red-filtered flashlight. If they're doing a systematic search, they'll eventually work their way to this position. We need to think about moving again. But Rodriguez was looking at a bigger problem. Look at this map. They're not just searching randomly. If they block these 3 passes, he pointed to key terrain features, they'll have us trapped in this entire valley system. No way out except through them. Park lowered his scope. Chief, I'm seeing more vehicles arriving in the village. This is turning into a major operation. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a simple reconnaissance mission was now becoming a fight for survival. The Taliban had somehow detected their presence and was mobilizing significant resources to hunt them down. Rodriguez made another decision. We're not waiting for extraction. Chun, plot us a course to the Pakistani border. If we can't get picked up, we'll have to walk out. Chun studied the map and GPS coordinates. That's over 50 kilometers of mountainous terrain, Chief, through areas we know are crawling with Taliban. Better than sitting here waiting for them to find us, Rodriguez replied grimly. As they prepared for what might be a very long journey, Williams spotted something that made his blood run cold. Chief, take a look at this. Through his night vision scope, Williams had been scanning the approaches to their position. Now he was focused on a ridgeline about 800 meters away. What am I looking at? Rodriguez asked, taking the scope. Watch the area just below that distinctive rock formation. Something's moving there, but it's not moving like the other search teams. Rodriguez studied the area carefully. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. Then, for just a moment, he caught a glimpse of what Williams was referring to. A barely visible shape that seemed to move independently of the other Taliban forces. Could be an advanced scout, Rodriguez suggested. Maybe, Williams replied. But the movement pattern is wrong. It's too disciplined, too careful. That's not how militia fighters move. Chen had been listening to radio chatter when he suddenly went rigid with attention. Chief, you need to hear this. He handed Rodriguez the radio earpiece. The transmission was faint, but Rodriguez could make out enough Pashto to understand the general meaning. The Taliban weren't just conducting a random search. They had specific intelligence about American forces in the area, including details about team size and equipment. They know exactly what they're looking for, Rodriguez told his team quietly. This is a targeted operation. As if to emphasize the point, the radio crackled with a new transmission. This one was clearer, and Chun translated as he listened. They're talking about a special reward for capturing Americans alive. Someone wants prisoners, not just bodies. That changed everything. Rodriguez had been planning their movement based on the assumption that they were dealing with a standard Taliban patrol looking to eliminate American forces. But if the enemy wanted prisoners, they would be much more careful about using heavy weapons or explosives that might harm their targets. It also meant the Taliban would be more persistent in their search. A simple patrol might give up after a few hours. A capture mission would continue until they achieved their objective. New plan, Rodriguez announced. We're going to move deeper into the mountains before heading toward the border. The terrain will be harder, but it'll also be more difficult for them to coordinate a large search operation. Park had been monitoring the search teams below when he noticed something disturbing. Chief, they're bringing in tracking dogs. Rodriguez cursed under his breath. Dogs would make it much harder to evade the search teams. Their scent trail would lead the Taliban directly to their current position and reveal their direction of movement. How long before the dogs reach our previous position? Rodriguez asked. Maybe 30 minutes, Park estimated. That gave them a narrow window to put distance between themselves and their pursuers before the dogs picked up their trail. But there's another problem. They would need to find water to break their scent trail, and there wasn't much available in this rocky terrain. Chen had been studying the topographical map. There's a seasonal stream about 2 kilometers northwest of here. If we can reach it and follow it for a distance, we might be able to throw off the dogs. It was their best option under the circumstances. Rodriguez made the call to move immediately. The 4 SEALs began making their way across the rocky terrain toward the stream Chun had identified. Every step had to be calculated to avoid leaving obvious tracks while still making reasonable time. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the search operation growing closer. Vehicle engines, radio chatter, and the distant barking of dogs all served as reminders that their enemies were methodically closing in. Rodriguez set a punishing pace as they moved through the darkness. His team kept up without complaint, understanding that their survival depended on staying ahead of the pursuit. When they reached the stream, it was barely more than a trickle of water flowing between the rocks. But it was enough to serve their purpose. Rodriguez led the team into the shallow water, and they began moving upstream, stepping carefully on the rocks to avoid leaving tracks in the mud. They followed the stream for nearly a kilometer before Rodriguez called for another halt. Chun, any radio traffic about the dogs? Chun listened for a few minutes before responding. They're having trouble with the scent trail. Sounds like the dogs lost it somewhere around our previous position. That was encouraging news, but Rodriguez knew their advantage wouldn't last long. The Taliban would expand their search pattern, and with the number of personnel they were deploying, it was only a matter of time before someone spotted the SEAL team. We need to find a place to hole up during daylight, Rodriguez told his team. Moving in the open during the day will get us spotted for sure. Williams had been studying the terrain ahead through his night vision scope. There's a cave system about half a kilometer up that ridge. Might give us the concealment we need. As they began moving toward the potential hiding spot Williams had identified, Park suddenly held up his hand for silence. Listen, he whispered. In the distance, they could hear a sound that made all of their hearts sink. Helicopter rotors. They're bringing in air support, Chen observed grimly. Rodriguez felt their situation becoming more desperate by the minute. Ground forces, tracking dogs, and now helicopters. The Taliban was committed to this operation in a way that suggested it was much more than a routine patrol. The helicopter sound was getting closer. Soon, thermal imaging and searchlights would be scanning the mountainside. Their window for finding concealment was closing rapidly. "Double time," Rodriguez ordered. "We need to reach that cave system before they bring the birds overhead." The SEALs picked up their pace, moving as quickly as they dared across the treacherous rocky terrain. Behind them, the helicopter sound continued to grow louder, and they could see the first hints of searchlights beginning to sweep across the valley they had just left. As they neared the cave system Williams had spotted, Rodriguez realized they were about to face their most challenging test yet. Trapped in unfamiliar territory, hunted by a determined enemy with superior numbers and equipment and cut off from all support, the four SEALs would have to rely entirely on their training, their teamwork, and their determination to survive. The real fight was just beginning. The cave entrance was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. Chief Rodriguez went first, testing the stability of the rocks around the opening before signaling his team to follow. The narrow passage opened into a larger chamber about 15 feet deep and 8 feet wide, enough space for 4 men to take cover, but cramped enough that they'd have to be careful about noise and movement. Williams set up watch at the cave entrance while Chun immediately began working on their communication equipment. If there was any chance of reaching their base or calling for help, this might be their best opportunity before the search teams closed in further. Park spread out their detailed topographical maps and began plotting potential escape routes. "Chief, from here we've got 3 main options for getting out of this valley system," he said quietly, pointing at different terrain features. "None of them are going to be easy." Rodriguez studied the maps while keeping one ear tuned to Williams, who was monitoring the search activity outside. The helicopter they'd heard was now making systematic passes across the ridge system, using powerful searchlights to illuminate potential hiding spots. "Talk to me about these routes," Rodriguez said to Park. "Option 1. We head north toward our original extraction point. It's the shortest distance, but that's probably where they'll expect us to go. Plus, they might have people waiting there already. Option 2. We go east, deeper into the mountains. Longer route, harder terrain, but potentially fewer enemy forces. Problem is, we don't have detailed intelligence about Taliban presence in that area." Rodriguez nodded. "And option 3? Southwest toward the Pakistani border. It's the longest route, probably 3 to 4 days of hard travel through mountain passes. But if we can make it, we'd be out of their operational area." The sound of the helicopter was getting closer. Through the cave entrance, they could see the searchlight beam sweeping across the rocky terrain outside their position. Williams held up his hand for absolute silence as the aircraft passed directly overhead. The powerful rotor wash sent dust and small rocks cascading down the hillside. For several long minutes, the helicopter hovered in their immediate area, the searchlight probing every shadow and crevice. Chin had been working quietly with their radio equipment, trying different frequencies and antenna configurations. Finally, he caught Rodriguez's attention and, mouthed silently, got something. Rodriguez crawled over to where Chun was positioned with the radio. Chun handed him an earpiece, and Rodriguez listened carefully to what sounded like American voices on a distant frequency. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but Rodriguez could make out enough to understand that it was military traffic. Someone was coordinating search and rescue operations, but the signal was too weak to determine if it was related to their situation. Chun whispered directly into Rodriguez's ear. "I think it's coming from a base about 60 kilometers north of here. Could be our people, could be another unit entirely." Rodriguez considered their options. If it was their base, try to coordinate a rescue operation. They needed to find a way to make contact. But transmitting from their current position would reveal their location to anyone monitoring radio frequencies, and given how the Taliban seemed to know about their mission, that could include the enemy. The helicopter finally moved on, continuing its search pattern to the west. Williams relaxed slightly, but kept his eyes focused on the cave entrance. "They're being very systematic," Williams reported quietly. That bird made 3 passes over this area before moving on. They're not just looking randomly. Park had been listening to the distant sounds of the ground search teams. I'm counting at least 2 separate groups working their way up this ridge system. They're staying in radio contact with each other and coordinating their movements. Rodriguez looked at his watch. It was now 0520 hours. Dawn would be breaking in less than 2 hours, and their tactical situation would change dramatically once the sun came up. Night vision and darkness had been their main advantages. In daylight, they would be much more vulnerable to detection. Chen had continued monitoring various radio frequencies, and he suddenly became very alert. He gestured for Rodriguez to listen again. This time, the transmission was clearer. Rodriguez heard what was definitely an American voice saying something about missing personnel and last known coordinates. His heart rate increased as he realized this might actually be search and rescue traffic related to their team. But before he could hear more, Chun grabbed his arm urgently. On a different frequency, he was picking up Taliban communications that were much stronger and clearer. "They're talking about closing off the northern escape routes," Chun whispered. "Something about positioning blocking forces at key mountain passes." That eliminated Rodriguez's first option. If the Taliban were setting up roadblocks and checkpoints on the northern routes, trying to reach their original extraction point would likely lead them into an ambush. Williams had noticed something outside the cave. "Chief, we've got movement on the ridge across from us. Looks like a 2-man team setting up an observation post." Rodriguez carefully moved to the cave entrance and peered out. About 600 meters away, on the opposite ridge, he could see 2 figures using night vision equipment to scan the area where the SEAL team was hidden. "Can they see this cave entrance from their position?" Rodriguez asked. Williams studied the angles carefully. "Not directly, but if we move around much or show any light, they'll spot us for sure." The tactical situation was becoming more constrained by the hour. Taliban forces were systematically closing off escape routes, establishing observation posts, and maintaining constant pressure through coordinated search teams. Rodriguez made a decision. "We're staying put until full darkness tomorrow night. Moving in daylight is too risky now, and we need time to plan our route carefully." It meant spending nearly 18 hours in the cramped cave, but it also gave them time to monitor enemy movements and potentially establish communication with friendly forces. Chun continued working with their radio equipment throughout the early morning hours. As the sun began to rise, he was able to pick up additional American military traffic. Some of it was definitely related to their mission. "Chief," Chun whispered excitedly, "I've got confirmation that search and rescue operations are active. They're looking for a missing 4-man team in this area." That was encouraging news, but it also raised new concerns. If search and rescue teams were operating in the area, they could inadvertently walk into the same Taliban trap that had caught Rodriguez's team. "Can you transmit a warning without giving away our position?" Rodriguez asked. Chun shook his head. "Any transmission strong enough to reach them will be picked up by Taliban monitoring stations. We'd be compromising ourselves and potentially the rescue teams." Williams had been maintaining watch at the cave entrance as daylight gradually filled the valley below. "Chief, you need to see this," he said quietly. Rodriguez moved to where Williams was positioned and looked out at the village they had been observing for the past 3 days. The level of activity was incredible. Dozens of vehicles were now visible, along with what appeared to be over 100 armed personnel. "This isn't just about us," Rodriguez realized. "They're preparing for a major operation." Park joined them at the cave entrance. "Look at the weapon systems they're moving. Those are heavy machine guns, mortars, maybe even some anti-aircraft equipment." The implications were staggering. The Taliban wasn't just mobilizing to hunt down one SEAL team. They were preparing for a significant military operation, possibly against the American base where Rodriguez's team had originated. "Chun, are you picking up any intelligence about what they're planning?" Rodriguez asked. Chun had been monitoring Taliban radio traffic throughout the morning. "From what I can understand, they're talking about a coordinated attack on multiple targets. American bases, convoy routes, maybe even aircraft. Rodriguez felt a growing sense of urgency. His team had stumbled into something much bigger than their original reconnaissance mission. The intelligence they had gathered about Taliban activities in this valley could be crucial for preventing a major enemy operation. But first, they had to survive long enough to report what they had learned. Williams continued his observation of the enemy positions. They've established permanent checkpoints at 3 locations where roads enter or exit this valley. Nothing's moving without their knowledge. The Taliban had effectively turned the entire valley into a controlled zone. Rodriguez's team was trapped inside an area that was becoming more heavily fortified by the hour. As the morning progressed, the search teams resumed their systematic sweep of the mountainside. Helicopter patrols continued overhead, and Rodriguez could hear tracking dogs working their way up the ridge system below their position. "They're going to find us eventually," Park observed grimly. "Maybe not today, but if we stay in this area much longer, they'll cover every possible hiding spot." Rodriguez had been thinking the same thing. Their current position provided excellent concealment, but it was also a trap. If they were discovered, there would be no way to escape from the cave quickly enough to avoid capture. Chen had been plotting radio signal strengths and directions throughout the day. "Chief, I think I figured out where our base is trying to coordinate rescue operations from. There's a temporary command post about 40 kilometers north of here. Can we reach them?" "Maybe, but it would require us to get to higher ground with better line of sight for radio transmission. And that means exposing ourselves to enemy observation." Rodriguez studied their options carefully. Every choice involved significant risks. Stay hidden and hope the search teams miss their position or attempt to break out, and contact friendly forces while risking detection and capture. The decision was made for him when Williams spotted something that changed everything. "Chief, we got a problem." "Big problem." Rodriguez moved to the cave entrance where Williams was pointing toward the village below. A new convoy had arrived, and it was unlike anything they had seen before. "Those are Pakistani military vehicles," Williams said quietly. Rodriguez studied the convoy through his scope. Williams was right. The vehicles bore the markings and equipment of the Pakistani army, not Taliban militia. "What are Pakistani forces doing in Afghanistan?" Park asked. The answer was as disturbing as it was obvious. The Taliban operation they had been observing wasn't just a militia action. It involved official Pakistani military support, which meant it was likely sanctioned at high levels of the Pakistani government. Chen had been listening to radio traffic when he suddenly became very agitated. "Chief, they're talking about moving to Phase 2 of their operation. Whatever they're planning, it's happening tonight." Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His team had uncovered evidence of a major Taliban operation with Pakistani military support, targeted at American forces. The intelligence was crucial, but they were trapped in enemy territory with no way to communicate it to their base. "We have to get word out," Rodriguez told his team. "Whatever the risk, this information is too important to keep to ourselves." Williams nodded in agreement. "Even if it costs us our lives, other American forces need to know what's coming." Chen had been working on a plan. "Chief, if we can get to the high ridge about 2 kilometers north of here, I might be able to boost our radio signal enough to reach the rescue teams. But getting there means crossing open ground in daylight." "What about waiting for darkness?" Park asked. "From the radio chatter, I don't think we have that long. Phase 2 of their operation starts after sunset. If we're going to warn anyone, it has to be in the next few hours." Rodriguez looked at each of his team members. They all understood the situation. Attempting to reach the high ground for radio transmission would likely expose them to enemy forces. But staying hidden while a major attack was launched against American forces was not an option. "We go," Rodriguez decided. "Chun, how long do you need for the radio transmission?" "Maybe 10 minutes to establish contact and relay the essential intelligence." "Williams, Park, can you provide security for 10 minutes while Chun and I handle communications?" Both men nodded without hesitation. Rodriguez checked his watch. It was now 1,430 hours. They would need to move soon if they were going to reach the transmission point and get back to concealment before the afternoon search patrols intensified. As they prepared to leave their hiding place, Chun picked up one more radio transmission that made their mission even more urgent. "Chief," he said quietly, "they just confirmed target locations for tonight's attacks. Our base is on the list." The cave that had provided safety for the past 10 hours now felt like a prison. Rodriguez knew that hundreds of American military personnel were in danger, and his team might be the only ones in position to provide warning. "Pack it up," he told his team. "We're moving now." The four SEALs gathered their essential equipment and prepared to leave the safety of their concealment. Outside, Taliban search teams were still patrolling the mountainside, and helicopter patrols were making regular passes overhead. Rodriguez took one last look at the valley below, now understanding that it was the staging area for a major enemy offensive. Then he led his team out of the cave and into what might be their final mission. The race against time had begun. Rodriguez led his team out of the cave at 1,445 hours, knowing they had a narrow window of opportunity before the afternoon patrol cycles intensified. The route to the high ridge would take them across two areas of open ground where they would be completely exposed to observation from the valley below. Chin had calculated that they needed to reach the transmission site within 90 minutes to have enough time for radio contact before they would be forced to find new concealment. Every minute spent in the open increased their risk of detection exponentially. Williams took point position, using his scope to scan ahead for enemy forces while Park covered their rear approach. The Taliban search teams had been moving in predictable patterns throughout the morning, but Rodriguez couldn't count on that consistency continuing. The first stretch of their movement took them along a rocky ledge that provided some concealment from the village below. They moved in single file, staying low and pausing frequently to listen for helicopter engines or radio chatter from nearby search teams. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they reached the first open area they needed to cross. It was a saddle between two ridges, about 200 meters of exposed ground with no cover except scattered boulders. Rodriguez studied the area through his scope before making the crossing. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they might run into a patrol. Too late, and they would be caught in the open when the afternoon search activity intensified. "Chun, any radio traffic about patrol schedules?" Rodriguez whispered. Chun listened carefully to Taliban communications for several minutes. "Sounds like the next helicopter sweep is scheduled for 1,530 hours. Ground patrols are supposed to check in every 30 minutes. That gave them a 15-minute window to make the crossing. Rodriguez signaled his team to prepare for movement. Williams sprinted across the open ground first, reaching the cover of rocks on the far side without incident. He immediately established overwatch while Park made his crossing. Chun went third, carrying their enhanced radio equipment. And finally, Rodriguez covered the team's rear. The second phase of their movement took them up a steep rocky slope toward the ridgeline, where Chun believed they could establish radio contact. The terrain was treacherous, with loose stones that could easily cause noise or injury if someone fell. Park was climbing ahead of the others when he suddenly held up his hand for an immediate halt. Through his scope, he had spotted something that made his blood run cold. "Sniper position," Park whispered into his throat microphone. 200 meters ahead, just below the ridge line. Rodriguez moved carefully to where he could see what Park had identified. A Taliban fighter with a scoped rifle was positioned among the rocks, watching the approaches to the high ground. The sniper was perfectly positioned to observe anyone trying to reach the ridgeline. "Can we go around him?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Williams studied the terrain through his scope. "Negative, Chief. He's got overwatch on all the practical routes to the ridge. We'd have to go back and find a completely different approach." Chun checked his watch nervously. "Chief, if we have to backtrack and find another route, we won't make it in time. The Taliban operation starts at sunset, and it's already mid-afternoon." Rodriguez faced an impossible choice. They could attempt to eliminate the sniper, but gunfire would alert every enemy force in the area to their location. They could try to find an alternate route, but that would take too much time. Or they could abort the mission and let the attack on American forces proceed without warning. Can you get a clean shot without alerting other positions? Rodriguez asked Williams. Williams studied the sniper's position carefully. Maybe, but I need to get within 300 meters. And even a suppressed rifle shot might be heard by anyone else in the area. Park had been observing the enemy sniper's behavior through his scope. Chief, this guy's not amateur militia. Look at his equipment, his positioning, his discipline. That's professional military training. Rodriguez took another look and realized Park was right. The sniper was using high-quality equipment and had positioned himself with excellent fields of fire and concealment. This was likely one of the Pakistani military personnel they had observed in the valley. Chen, do we have any other options for getting a radio signal out? Rodriguez asked. Chen had been considering alternatives throughout their movement. There's a secondary ridge about a kilometer east of here. It's not as high, so the signal wouldn't be as strong, but it might work. How long to reach it? At least an hour, assuming we don't run into more enemy positions. Rodriguez looked at his watch again. Even if they could reach the secondary transmission site, they would be cutting it very close to the Taliban operation timeline. And there was no guarantee the radio signal would be strong enough from that location. Williams had been studying the sniper position when he noticed something important. Chief, there's a blind spot on his left flank. If we can get into that dead ground, we might be able to approach within 50 meters without being seen. Park looked where Williams was indicating. It's risky. If he shifts position, or if there are other security personnel we haven't spotted, we'd be trapped in the open. But it might be our only chance to reach the primary transmission site, Rodriguez realized. The decision came down to acceptable risk versus mission importance. Rodriguez knew that hundreds of American lives could depend on getting their intelligence to friendly forces. That made almost any risk acceptable. We take him, Rodriguez decided. Williams, you're the primary shooter. Park, you watch for other security positions. Chun, get ready to move fast once we eliminate the threat. The three-man assault team began moving carefully toward the sniper's position, using the terrain features Williams had identified to stay in his blind spot. Every step had to be calculated and silent. Rodriguez felt his heart rate increasing as they closed the distance. They were now committed to a course of action that would likely expose their presence to every enemy force in the area. But the intelligence they carried was too important to lose. When they reached a position 50 meters from a sniper, Williams began setting up for a shot. The suppressed rifle would reduce the sound signature, but elimination of the target had to be immediate and certain. Williams studied the target through his scope, waiting for the perfect moment when the sniper was focused away from their direction. The shot would have to be precise. Any movement or sound from the target could alert other enemy forces. On my count, Williams whispered. 3, 2, 1. The suppressed rifle made a soft popping sound, and the enemy sniper slumped forward without making a sound. Williams' shot had been perfect, striking the target in the head and eliminating any chance of outcry. Target down, Williams reported quietly. Move, move, move. The team sprinted up the remaining distance to the ridge line, with Chun immediately beginning to set up the radio equipment for transmission. They now had maybe 10 minutes before other Taliban forces noticed their sniper wasn't responding to radio checks. Chun worked frantically to establish contact with friendly forces while Rodriguez, Williams, and Park established security positions around the transmission site. The enhanced radio equipment gave them significantly more range, but it also required more time to set up properly. Come on, Chun muttered as he adjusted antenna positions and frequency settings. After what seemed like hours, but was actually only 3 minutes, he began to hear American voices on the radio. I've got contact, Chun announced quietly. It's definitely our rescue teams. Rodriguez took the radio handset and began transmitting their intelligence. He spoke quickly, but clearly, providing locations, enemy strength estimates, and details about the planned Taliban operation. Be advised, enemy forces are preparing coordinated attacks on multiple American installations. Pakistani military involvement confirmed. Estimated enemy strength, over 200 personnel with heavy weapons. Timeline for attacks is today at sunset. The response from the rescue team was immediate and urgent. Understood. Can you confirm your current position for extraction? Rodriguez provided their coordinates, while Williams kept watch on the approaches to their position. They had been transmitting for 6 minutes when Park spotted the first sign of enemy response to their activities. Multiple vehicles moving up the access road, Park reported. Looks like they've figured out where we are. Chun continued relaying detailed intelligence while Rodriguez coordinated with the rescue teams. We need immediate extraction at these coordinates. Enemy forces closing on our position. Extraction team is inbound. ETA, 20 minutes. Can you hold your position? Rodriguez looked at the terrain around their location and the enemy forces moving toward them. 20 minutes seemed like an eternity. Negative. We'll have to move to alternate positions. We'll attempt to reach extraction point alpha. Copy that. Extraction point alpha in 20 minutes. Chun finished transmitting their intelligence and began breaking down the radio equipment. The most critical information had been passed to friendly forces, but now they faced the challenge of surviving long enough to be rescued. Williams was tracking the approaching enemy forces through his scope. At least 3 vehicles with mounted weapons. Estimated 20 to 30 personnel. They'll be in effective range in about 10 minutes. The Taliban response was faster and more organized than Rodriguez had expected. Someone had been monitoring radio frequencies and had quickly triangulated their transmission location. Did anyone else notice that their response time was too fast? Park asked as they prepared to move out. Rodriguez had been thinking the same thing. They were ready for us to try something like this. Almost like they were waiting for us to break radio silence. The implications were disturbing. If the Taliban had been anticipating their radio transmission, it suggested they had detailed knowledge about SEAL operational procedures and equipment capabilities. Chun finished packing the radio equipment. Ready to move, Chief. Rodriguez led his team down the backside of the ridge, using the terrain to break visual contact with the approaching enemy forces. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away across difficult mountain terrain. Behind them, they could hear vehicles arriving at the base of the ridge and personnel beginning to climb toward their former position. Radio chatter indicated the Taliban was deploying additional forces to cut off potential escape routes. They're really committed to capturing us, Williams observed as they moved rapidly down the rocky slope. Too committed, Rodriguez replied grimly. This whole operation feels like it was planned specifically to draw us out. Chun had been monitoring radio frequencies as they moved. Chief, I'm picking up references to American prisoners. They definitely want us alive. That confirmed Rodriguez's growing suspicion that their mission had been compromised from the beginning. The Taliban hadn't just stumbled across their presence. They had been waiting for them. As they reached the bottom of the ridge and began moving toward the extraction point, helicopter engines became audible in the distance. But Rodriguez couldn't tell if the aircraft were friendly rescue helicopters or Taliban reinforcements. Park was monitoring their rear when he spotted something that changed everything. Chief, we've got a problem. That's not just militia chasing us. Rodriguez looked where Park was pointing. Moving down the ridge, behind them were figures in military uniforms carrying professional equipment and moving with tactical discipline. Pakistani Special Forces, Williams identified. This just became a completely different fight. Rodriguez realized their situation had escalated far beyond a simple reconnaissance mission gone wrong. They were now being hunted by professional military units with orders to capture them alive. The race to the extraction point had become a fight for survival against overwhelming odds. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as Rodriguez led his team through a narrow ravine toward the extraction point. The aircraft were definitely getting closer, but in the echoing mountain terrain, it was impossible to determine if they were friendly or hostile until visual contact was established. Chun continued monitoring radio frequencies while they moved, trying to distinguish between Taliban communications and potential rescue team transmissions. The radio chatter had increased dramatically since their transmission from the ridge, with multiple units coordinating what sounded like a major search and capture operation. "Chief, I'm hearing American voices on the rescue frequency," Chen reported breathlessly as they climbed over a cluster of fallen rocks. "But I'm also picking up what sounds like Pakistani military communications on a different frequency." Williams was maintaining rear security when he spotted movement that confirmed their worst fears. "We've got professional tracking teams about 600 meters behind us. They're moving fast, and they know what they're doing." Rodriguez glanced back at the pursuing forces through his scope. The Pakistani Special Forces were using tactical movement techniques and equipment that matched anything the SEALs could do. This wasn't going to be a matter of simply outrunning militia fighters. "How much further to the extraction point?" Rodriguez asked Park, who was navigating with their GPS unit. "About 800 meters, but we have to cross 2 more areas of open ground. If they have overwatch positions established, we could walk into an ambush." The extraction point was a small clearing on a plateau that could accommodate a helicopter landing. But reaching it required climbing out of the ravine system and crossing terrain that would expose them to observation and fire from multiple directions. Chen suddenly grabbed Rodriguez's arm. "Chief, listen to this." He handed Rodriguez the radio earpiece. The transmission was clear American English. "Bravo team, this is Rescue 6. We are inbound to Extraction Point Alpha. ETA 10 minutes. Be prepared for immediate departure upon our arrival." "That's our ride," Rodriguez said with relief. But the relief was short-lived when Chun pointed to a different radio frequency. "Pakistani forces are communicating about blocking the helicopter landing zone. They know exactly where we're trying to go. The trap was closing from multiple directions. Pakistani Special Forces were pursuing them from behind. Taliban militia were moving to block escape routes, and enemy forces were positioning to prevent helicopter extraction." Williams had been studying the terrain ahead when he identified a potential solution. "Chief, there's a secondary landing area about 400 meters west of the primary extraction point. It's smaller and more difficult to access, but it might not be covered by enemy forces." Rodriguez considered the option. Changing extraction points would require radio contact with the rescue team, which would reveal their new location to anyone monitoring communications. But attempting to reach the original extraction point might lead them directly into an ambush. "Chen, can you reach the rescue team on a secure frequency?" "I can try, but any transmission is going to give away our general location." The sound of helicopter engines was now clearly audible, and Rodriguez could see aircraft lights in the distance. But he still couldn't determine if they were friendly rescue helicopters or enemy aircraft. Park had been watching the extraction point through his scope when he saw something that made the decision for them. "Chief, the primary LZ is compromised. I can see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the clearing." Rodriguez looked through his scope and confirmed Park's assessment. Taliban fighters had established firing positions that would turn the helicopter landing zone into a killing field. "Chen, contact the rescue team immediately. Tell them the primary LZ is hot, and provide coordinates for the alternate site." Chen began transmitting while the team continued moving toward the secondary landing area Williams had identified. Behind them, the Pakistani Special Forces were closing the distance steadily. "Rescue 6, this is Bravo team. Primary LZ is compromised by enemy forces. Request extraction at alternate coordinates." Chen provided the GPS location of the smaller clearing Williams had spotted. The response was immediate. "Bravo team, we have enemy aircraft in the area. Our approach to the alternate site will be difficult. Can you provide security for the landing zone?" Rodriguez looked at his 3 teammates and their available ammunition. Providing security against professional military units would stretch their capabilities to the limit, but it was their only chance. "Affirmative, Rescue 6. We'll secure the LZ. Make your approach as fast as possible." As they reached the edge of the secondary extraction point, Rodriguez could see that Williams had chosen well. The clearing was surrounded by rocky terrain that would make it difficult for enemy forces to establish good firing positions. But It also meant the rescue helicopter would have to make a challenging approach. Positions, Rodriguez ordered. His team immediately spread out to provide 360-degree security around the small landing zone. Williams established overwatch on the approach route they had used, watching for the Pakistani pursuit teams. Park covered the eastern approach, where Taliban forces might arrive from the village area. Chin set up his position to watch the northern approach while maintaining radio contact with the rescue team. Rodriguez positioned himself to cover the most likely avenue of enemy approach while maintaining command and control of his team's positions. The helicopter engines were getting very close when Williams spotted the first enemy forces arriving at their location. "Contact rear," Williams called out quietly. Pakistani forces, approximately 200 meters, and closing. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see the professional military unit that had been tracking them. They were moving with tactical precision, using cover and concealment as they approached the landing zone. "Chin, where's our ride?" "Inbound, 60 seconds. A minute had never seemed so long. Rodriguez knew that the Pakistani forces would be in effective weapons range well before the rescue helicopter could land and take off with his team. The first enemy shots came from Williams' sector. Suppressed rifle fire began impacting the rocks around their positions as the Pakistani special forces attempted to pin down the SEAL team. "Return fire, controlled pairs," Rodriguez ordered. The SEALs began engaging the enemy forces with precise, aimed shots designed to keep them at a distance rather than eliminate them entirely. Their ammunition was limited, and they needed to conserve it for the critical moments during helicopter extraction. Park spotted additional enemy movement in his sector. Multiple contacts east side. Looks like Taliban militia moving to support the Pakistani forces. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Rodriguez's team was outnumbered at least 10-1 and would soon be surrounded by enemy forces with superior firepower. Chin was still in radio contact with the rescue helicopter when he heard something that gave him hope. "Chief, Rescue 6 says they have gunship escort. Apache helicopters are inbound to provide fire support." The sound of helicopter engines was now very loud, and Rodriguez could see lights approaching their position. But he still couldn't tell if they were looking at rescue aircraft or enemy helicopters. Williams continued engaging enemy forces from his position when he suddenly called out urgently, "Chief, we've got a problem. Professional sniper, maybe 400 meters out." I can see his scope reflection. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. A trained sniper at that range could eliminate his entire team before the rescue helicopter could land. They were trapped in an open area with minimal cover and facing professional military opposition. "Can you counter-snipe?" Rodriguez asked Williams. "Negative. I don't have a clear shot from this position, and if I move, I'll be exposed to the other enemy forces." Chin was monitoring radio traffic when he picked up a transmission that changed everything. "Chief, the Apache gunships are requesting target designation. They need us to mark enemy positions." Rodriguez realized they might have a chance if they could guide the attack helicopters to the enemy positions. But designating targets would require exposing themselves to enemy fire. "Williams, Park, can you provide covering fire while I mark targets for the gunships?" Affirmative, both men responded immediately. Rodriguez moved to a position where he could see the Pakistani sniper position and began using his laser designator to mark the target. The infrared laser would be invisible to the naked eye, but clearly visible to the Apache helicopter's targeting systems. The response was immediate and devastating. A burst of 30mm cannon fire from the attack helicopter eliminated the sniper position in seconds. Rodriguez quickly moved the laser designator to mark the Pakistani Special Forces positions. Targets marked, Rodriguez transmitted to the Apache gunships. The attack helicopters began engaging enemy positions with precision fire, forcing the Pakistani forces to take cover and disrupting their coordinated assault on the landing zone. During the brief respite provided by the air support, Rodriguez heard the distinct sound of their rescue helicopter approaching the landing zone. "Bravo team, this is Rescue 6. Beginning approach to your position." Be ready for immediate extraction. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter came in fast and low, with door gunners providing additional suppressive fire against enemy positions. The aircraft flared hard and touched down in the small clearing, rotors still turning. Go, 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 Rodriguez shouted to his team. Williams, Park, and Chun sprinted toward the helicopter while Rodriguez provided covering fire from his position. As his teammates reached the aircraft, Rodriguez began his own movement toward the extraction point. Enemy fire intensified as the Taliban and Pakistani forces realized their targets were escaping. Bullets impacted all around Rodriguez as he ran the final 50 meters to the helicopter. Chun and Williams reached out to pull Rodriguez aboard just as the aircraft began lifting off. Behind them, enemy forces continued firing at the departing helicopter, but the Apache gunships maintained suppressive fire that kept most of the enemy heads down. As the rescue helicopter climbed away from the mountain valley, Rodriguez looked back at the area where they had spent the past 4 days. The intelligence they had gathered would prevent a major attack on American forces, but the cost had been enormous. Chun, did all our intelligence get through to headquarters? Rodriguez asked over the helicopter's intercom system. Affirmative, Chief. They have everything: Taliban force strength, Pakistani military involvement, target locations, and timing for the planned attacks. Williams was applying first aid to a minor shrapnel wound on Park's arm when he looked up at Rodriguez. Chief, how did they know so much about our mission? Rodriguez had been thinking about the same question throughout their ordeal. The enemy's knowledge of their presence, their procedures, and even their extraction plans suggested a serious security breach. I don't know, Rodriguez replied grimly. But someone's going to have to answer some very hard questions when we get back to base. As the helicopter flew towards safety, Rodriguez realized their mission was far from over. The intelligence they had gathered would prevent immediate attacks on American forces, but the larger question of how their mission had been compromised remained unanswered. The fight for survival was ending, but the investigation into betrayal was just beginning. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman just as the sun was setting behind the Afghan mountains. Rodriguez and his team had been in enemy territory for 4 days, and the exhaustion showed on every face as they climbed out of the aircraft. Major Sarah Collins, the base intelligence officer, was waiting for them on a landing pad along with a medical team. Her expression was grim as she approached Rodriguez. Chief, we need a debrief immediately, she said, raising her voice over the helicopter engines. The intelligence you transmitted has already prevented 3 separate attacks on our facilities. Rodriguez nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Standing behind Major Collins was Captain Michael Preston, the officer who had briefed them on their original mission 4 days earlier. Preston's presence at their arrival seemed odd. Mission briefers usually weren't involved in post-operation debriefings. The medical team quickly examined Rodriguez's men for injuries. Park's arm wound was minor, and Chen had some cuts from their movement through the rocky terrain, but overall the team was in good condition considering what they had endured. Williams noticed Rodriguez's attention on Captain Preston. Something bothering you about that, Chief? He asked quietly. Maybe, Rodriguez replied. Just seems unusual for him to be here. As they walked toward the debriefing facility, Major Collins provided an update on the intelligence they had transmitted. Your report about Pakistani military involvement has been elevated to the highest levels. State Department is already lodging formal protests. What about the immediate threat to our bases? Rodriguez asked. Neutralized. Based on your intelligence, we repositioned our forces and established defensive positions that made the Taliban attacks ineffective. Probably saved dozens of lives. That was satisfying news, but Rodriguez still had questions about how the Taliban had known so much about their mission. The enemy's knowledge had been too detailed and too accurate to be coincidental. The debriefing room was a secure facility in the center of the base. Rodriguez and his team sat at one side of the conference table while Major Collins, Captain Preston, and 2 other officers took positions across from them. Let's start from the beginning, Major Collins said, activating a digital recorder. Walk me through everything that happened from the time you were inserted. Rodriguez provided a detailed chronological account of their mission, beginning with the helicopter insertion and ending with their extraction. He made sure to include specific details about enemy force strength, equipment, and tactical capabilities. When he reached the part about discovering Pakistani military involvement, Captain Preston interrupted. Chief, are you certain about the Pakistani identification? The vehicles, uniforms, equipment, could they have been Taliban forces using captured or purchased Pakistani gear? The question bothered Rodriguez. Preston seemed more interested in questioning their intelligence than understanding what they had observed. Sir, my team and I have extensive experience identifying military equipment and personnel. What we observed were regular Pakistani army units, not Taliban fighters with stolen gear. Major Collins made notes while Rodriguez continued his account. When he described the enemy's knowledge of their position and extraction plans, she looked up with concern. You're suggesting someone provided the Taliban with operational details about your mission? Ma'am, the enemy knew too much about our presence, our procedures, and our timing for it to be accidental. Someone gave them information. Captain Preston leaned forward. Chief, isn't it possible the Taliban simply detected your presence through normal surveillance and responded accordingly? Rodriguez was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Preston's line of questioning. Every answer seemed designed to minimize or explain away evidence of a security breach. Williams decided to speak up. Sir, with respect, we observed the enemy establishing positions before we were detected. They were waiting for us. Shin nodded in agreement. The radio traffic I monitored included specific references to American equipment and team size. That's not information they could have obtained through surveillance. Major Collins studied the faces of Rodriguez's team members. Are you all in agreement that operational security was compromised? Yes, ma'am. All 4 SEALs responded simultaneously. Captain Preston's expression showed clear displeasure with their assessment. Gentlemen, making accusations about security breaches is a serious matter. You need to be very careful about such claims. Rodriguez felt his anger rising. Sir, we're not making accusations. We're reporting facts about what we observed in the field. The tension in the room was becoming obvious to everyone present. Major Collins called for a 10-minute break and asked Rodriguez to step outside with her. Chief, what's your read on Captain Preston's behavior? She asked quietly once they were alone in the corridor. Ma'am, he seems more interested in discrediting our report than understanding what happened. That concerns me. Major Collins nodded grimly. It concerns me too. When you transmitted your initial intelligence yesterday, Captain Preston was the first person to question whether the Pakistani involvement was accurate. Rodriguez felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to come together in his mind. Ma'am, who had access to our mission details before we were inserted? Limited distribution. Myself, Captain Preston, the helicopter crew, and a few communications personnel. She paused. Why? The Taliban knew too much, too early. Someone provided them with information before our mission even began. Major Collins was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through the implications. Chief, I need you and your team to continue the debriefing normally. Don't let on that we've had this conversation. Yes, ma'am. What are you planning to do? I'm going to have security personnel review Captain Preston's communications and financial records. If he's been compromised, we need to know immediately. Rodriguez and Major Collins returned to the debriefing room, where Captain Preston was talking quietly with the other officers. The remainder of the debriefing proceeded normally, with Rodriguez providing detailed technical information about enemy positions and equipment. When they finished, Major Collins announced that Rodriguez's team would be given 48 hours of rest before returning to operational status. As they left the debriefing room, Rodriguez noticed that Captain Preston remained behind with the other officers. Williams waited until they were back in their quarters before speaking. Chief, something's not right about this whole situation. I know. Major Collins is looking into it. Chin had been quiet during the walk back to their quarters, but now he had something to add. Chief, I've been thinking about the radio intercepts I made. Some of the Taliban communications included technical terms that aren't normally used by militia fighters. What kind of technical terms? Rodriguez asked. Military grid coordinates, NATO phonetic alphabet, even some American tactical terminology. It was like someone had been training them on our procedures. Park looked up from cleaning his equipment. That would explain why they knew exactly how to set up the ambush at our extraction point. Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle continuing to fall into place. If Captain Preston had been providing information to the Taliban, it would explain every aspect of their compromised mission. 2 hours later, Major Collins knocked on their door. "Chief, I need to speak with you privately." Rodriguez followed her to a secure conference room where she provided an update on her investigation. "We found evidence that Captain Preston has been in communication with individuals connected to Pakistani intelligence services. Financial records show unexplained deposits into his personal accounts over the past 6 months. Rodriguez felt a mixture of anger and vindication. "How long has he been compromising operations?" "We're still investigating, but it appears your mission wasn't the first. Several other operations have had unusual security issues that now make sense." "What happens next?" "Captain Preston is being taken into custody as we speak. There will be a full investigation into every operation he had access to. Your team may be called to testify in legal proceedings." Rodriguez nodded. "Whatever you need, ma'am. But I have one question." "What's that?" "How many other American lives were put at risk because of his betrayal?" Major Collins was quiet for a long moment. "Too many, Chief. Way too many." As Rodriguez returned to his quarters, he reflected on the events of the past 4 days. His team had completed their mission successfully despite overwhelming odds and deliberate betrayal. The intelligence they had gathered had prevented attacks on American forces and exposed a serious security breach. Williams looked up as Rodriguez entered their quarters. "How bad is it, Chief?" "Bad enough. But it's over now." Chun was monitoring radio frequencies out of habit when he picked up a transmission that caught his attention. "Chief, there's a lot of military traffic about Pakistan formally denying any involvement in operations against American forces." "Political damage control," Rodriguez replied. "They know we have evidence of their military participation." Park finished cleaning his weapon and looked at his teammates. "So what's next for us?" Rodriguez considered the question. They had been through an experience that would bond them together for the rest of their careers. They had faced betrayal, overwhelming odds, and life-threatening danger, and they had emerged stronger as a team. "Next, we continue doing our job," Rodriguez said simply. "But now we know that sometimes the biggest threats don't come from the enemy we can see." As the 4 SEALs settled in for their first night of real rest in almost a week, Rodriguez thought about the lessons they had learned. Trust was essential in special operations, but verification was equally important. They had survived because they had trusted each other completely while questioning everything else. The mission was over, but the bonds forged during those 4 days in enemy territory would last forever. They had proven that even when facing impossible odds and deliberate betrayal, American Special Operations Forces could still accomplish their mission and protect their fellow service members. Williams turned off the lights in their quarters, and for the first time in days, the 4 men were able to sleep without fear of enemy attack. The night was quiet except for the normal sounds of military base operations. In the darkness, Rodriguez allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had completed their mission, gathered crucial intelligence, prevented attacks on American forces, and exposed a traitor in their ranks. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new challenges. But tonight, they could rest knowing they had done their duty under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Chen's radio equipment was finally silent, no longer needed to call for help or coordinate with rescue teams. Park's maps were folded and stored, their escape routes no longer necessary. Williams' rifle was cleaned and secured, no longer needed to hold off pursuing enemy forces. The mission that had begun as routine reconnaissance had become a fight for survival against overwhelming odds. But through teamwork, determination, and the skills they had developed through years of training for American SEALs had prevailed against betrayal and enemy action. As Rodriguez finally fell asleep, he knew that the story of their 4 days behind enemy lines would become part of SEAL tradition. Future generations of special operations personnel would study their actions and learn from their experience. The most important lesson was simple. When everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible, and when betrayal comes from within, American Special Operations Forces never give up. They complete the mission, protect their teammates, and find a way to win. The silence of the Afghan night was broken only by the distant sound of helicopters conducting normal patrol operations. For Rodriguez and his team, it was the sound of safety and security, knowing that other American forces were continuing the mission they had helped to protect. Their ordeal was over, but their service would continue. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them with the confidence that comes from having survived the worst the enemy could throw at them. The sniper who had cut through the night was no longer a threat. The Taliban operation had been defeated. The Pakistani involvement had been exposed, and for American SEALs had made a home.